Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. As promised, if you were here yesterday, we're back again talking about macro photography and post-processing plus color control. We didn't talk about that yesterday, I should say, but we are back with our friends over at Calibrate. So want to kick off by saying thanks to Calibrate and NovaFlex for hosting this event. And a huge thanks to that man right over there, Matt Hill. Matt, what's happening? How you doing? Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to see you. It's always a pleasure to have you. I did let everybody know that you would be back yesterday, today, if that makes sense, which I think it does. So hopefully everybody here already knows what we're going to be talking about and is super excited like myself. If you do have any questions that you want to get over to Matt, please feel free. That's what we're here to do, is answer the hard-hitting questions. If you're joining us here on Zoom, you can use the Q&A tab. Otherwise, if you're joining us on Vimeo or Facebook, you can use the comment section. But otherwise, I've been enough of a nuisance to Matt in the green room, so I'm going to get out of his way and allow him to do what he does best, and I'll see you back in a little bit, Matt.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks to the team at B&H. Hi, everybody. Glad to see you here. I've got a great topic for you today, and I'm going to start by kicking it off with a little bit of background information. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we will get the correct screen up and running. And then we're going to start this. All right. So Scott, everybody can see my screen, correct?
As long as they have their screen on, we can see your screen.
Fantastic. Great. All right. So the topic today is macro photography. And we're not talking about capture. We're talking about post-processing and color control. And like Scott mentioned, there's two brands that are deeply supporting this process: Calibrate, which you might be familiar with, you might not be. You know, they might, before this, it was X-Rite photo and video, but Calibrate is the new kid in town. They're powered by X-Rite processing, but it's a new company. And NovaFlex, who literally supports everything I do with macro photography. So let's jump right into it. Thank you, Calibrate. Thank you, NovaFlex, and thank you, B&H. I love that you guys trust me, and I trust you too. So my name is Matt Hill, and I love good color. It's amazing what my color journey has been, and I've focused a lot on color in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's been a very nourishing journey. Most people know me for National Parks at Night, where I am an astro landscape photographer and educator. We also have the Night Photo Summit, which is coming up again for its 3rd year in early February. And also the Nightscaper Conference, which is not online, it's in person out in Kanab, Utah. So yes, I do a lot of night photography, but it's not the only kind of photography I do. I am also deeply interested in macro photography. So, but these are the other things that you can find me doing more of. Pop quiz. And I want you guys to know, let me know in the chat, how many people attending live or watching the replay have trouble with color when you're making macro images. And if you do, tell me what issues you have in those comments. We're going to come back to this. I want to see what I can answer for you directly. I have a whole plan of things I want to show you, but this is where we're going to start. Tell me what color ailments you have. When I make macro images, it's not just about getting close up to something and capturing the detail. Those two things are absolutely essential to macro, but also making sure that it's the right color. And I know that that sounds so simple and so basic, but it's actually takes great care to do it. And this image, without a little bit of warm and a little bit of cool in it, would be less remarkable than it is. And I took great care to make sure that those colors showed up in the places that they showed up in by placing them and observing them. But before I could do that, I had to make sure that I captured them correctly and rendered them correctly. The same goes for this one. This is a drop of water on a neutral density filter, of all things. And you can see in the reflection of this, the grids that I put on the LED softbox that I had. And those reflections are a neutral for a reason, but then there's this blue stripe, and that blue stripe is another light that I placed in a very specific place just to get that color. And then the light coming through from underneath is through the ND filter has a tint to it. No neutral density filter is neutral, by the way. Anyway, moving on. And here again, some light is neutral, some light is cool, some light is warm. All of it is intentional. And I think that's a really important point to make, is intent in this. And we can break that down into two different things. But when you really look at the details that capture people's emotion and attention, color has a big part to do with this. And your care and taking care of the color is also very important. When you shoot something like flowers, which is a very typical assignment or self-assignment for macro, the color of those flowers really does matter. So what do color problems look like? Well, let's take a look. We've probably seen this, but I want to belabor the point. Sometimes it can be too warm, like you see over here on the left, or sometimes too cold. And that's your color temperature slider in Lightroom, blue and yellow. Or sometimes it's too magenta or it's too green, and that's the tint slider in Lightroom, and that's either green or magenta. And as you slide it one way or the other, it affects the entire image. It's adding or subtracting one color or the other. And when you do it right, it ends up looking like it should, as opposed to variants of other things. Now, if we're talking about color control, this is what we're talking about, is making sure you arrive at a reliable and accurate destination. Now, if you look at these two images quickly, you probably can't tell the difference. But if you look at the one on the left versus the one on the right, you'll see the one on the right has a little bit more yes to it. And what is that yes? The yes is there's a little bit more saturation. There's a little bit more of certain colors in it. And what I want you to guess at in the comments is, what did I do between the first and the second image to make them different? And I'm going to move on and we'll check in on that in a second. And here's another example of it. The difference between the one on the left and the one on the right is subtle, but it is also essential. And if you take a look at the yellows where the pollen is, you'll see that the yellow on the right, potentially on your screen, should look better / more true. The highlights in the reflective parts of the flower should look more neutral, less blue. And the richness of the color on the right versus the left should be possibly more attractive to you. Now, that is subjective. In this case, this is totally objective. The one on the left has a canned camera profile, and the one on the right has a created camera profile. And that's the only difference between them. This one on the left has a correct camera profile, yet on the right, it has color correction adjustments. These are not scientific, they are aesthetic adjustments. So getting to the right place to start making adjustments and then making good decisions are two separate things. And let's look at that a little bit more deeply. But what I really want to say is there's a difference between taking a photograph and making a photograph. And I know that's a trope, but it exists for a reason, the phrase. We are actually trying to make photographs with intent, and that's when you graduate. So to do that, you need to take control of your inputs. What do I mean by that? Well, during capture, you should use a color checker, and the color checker should be appropriately sized to what you do. Now, I'm going to jump out of screen share for a second. I'm going to show my screen again. So this is the one that I use for macro photography. I'm just going to hold it up for you to show you. That's actually not the color checker itself. It's the package it comes in. and I'm going to very carefully remove it, and I'll show you how big it is. That's how big it is. It's called the Nano. It's a Color Checker Classic Nano. And when you're making macro photography, your subjects are often very, very small. So this is appropriately sized for much of macro photography. However, if you have, oh gosh, there we go. I meant to do that. Hey, sorry about that, guys. I was looking at my screen and I saw something happen. All right, here, we'll do this again. So this is a Color Checker Nano and not actual size. It's not as big as my head. It's as big as my eyeball, maybe. So this one is what I would recommend using because it's appropriately sized. Now, if you have a regular Color Checker Passport, you're going to have an opportunity to also use that too. However, this is the right one to use at the right size. So let's jump back in and take a look at this. So this is the macro target that you use, and we're going to talk about how to use it in a moment. You can also use a standard Color Checker Passport like the Duo, which is new. The Duo happens to have both photo and video panels inside of that clamshell case. And it's very helpful because most of us, like me, make both video and photography. So you can also use that in your scene if that's the one you have. But if you're really getting into doing macro, I would recommend getting the Nano. So what do? It's pretty easy. Take a picture of it. Make sure the picture is properly exposed. Make sure the light that's hitting your color checker is the light that's hitting your subject. If the light changes, shoot it again. Now, generally, if you're shooting macro indoors, you have control over the light. You take a picture once at the beginning, put it away, you're done. If you're shooting outdoors and you're going between sunlight and shade, or if the sunlight's changing its angle in the sky, you might want to shoot it a couple of times during the day. Why? For two reasons. One, you're going to use it for camera calibration. The second is you can use it to neutralize, to make something white balance correct. So you need to make sure it's evenly illuminated. Look at your histogram to make sure it's not clipping your highlights or your shadows. It should be properly exposed. Please, for the love of everything, do not touch those color panels because it will invalidate the results. You need to make sure that those don't get grease on them. They're very specifically formulated. Fill up the frame as much as you can. They say at least 10%. I'd say fill it up. It should be in focus and relatively level. So that is the color checker down there that we're looking at, that tiny, tiny little postage stamp. Now, I just want to say a word about stability. Macro requires alignment of many, many, many photos that are very shallow in depth of field. They have to be aligned and then focus stacked. You should use a support system that will stay steady. You'll notice in my background or BTS images that I'm using NovaFlex. That's for a reason. It's rock steady. I love it. I also use focusing rails for repeatability to make sure my image focus stacks for macro have the appropriate travel distance in between them. And PS, I love NovaFlex. Thanks, guys, for making great stuff. During your edit, you also need to take control of your color management. That means that you need to use color management. You need to use at least a colorimeter to measure your display and calibrate it and make sure that all that stuff is good. So I am just gonna do something really quick. I have a visual for you guys. Well, I'm using my glasses, right? My glasses are clear for a reason, right? If you're not using color management, it's like using some cool shades, right? These are fun to look through. These are fun to enjoy the world through. And after a while, you can become accustomed to this color, and you can think after a couple of minutes of using sunglasses like this, that this color is normal. This is the same thing as not profiling, calibrating your displays, because what you're looking at is not calibrated. It's a version of something. It was probably performed at the factory, and your display has changed over time. And what happens is you're looking through these lenses that have some sort of color effect to them or contrast or brightness effect to them, and it's not regulated. So you don't know what zero is. you're looking through colored sunglasses. When you use a colorimeter to profile and calibrate your display, it's like getting prescription glasses and making sure that everything is right. So I urge you to consider and purchase and use color management solutions. And that would include either a color checker display, if you have up to 1,000 nit display, and then up to 2,000 the color checker display plus. I'm not going to belabor the point. It's just necessary. It's like breathing. So to use the color checker, camera calibration, you need to download software that you put on your software on your laptop or your computer that you're using. So it works with most of the popular softwares out there. You're going to install it, and it's either going to act as a plugin for the software used, like I use Adobe Lightroom Classic, or you can use it as a standalone. And we will demo that today, especially because the nano here, it usually requires using that. So this is all available on the calibrate.com website, and I have the URL there, calibrate.com/us/software-downloads. I also use Helicon Focus Pro. I use it because Photoshop was not good. It is getting better. But when I do focus stacking, I just want it to work, and I need certain features, and Helicon Focus Pro has those features. There are other softwares out there, and if they work for you, that's fantastic. But today I'm going to show the Lightroom Classic and Helicon Focus Pro workflow because it's the one that works for me. And if you have something that works great for you, that's fantastic. I agree. You should use the tools that work for you. So to do that, you also need to install the Adobe Digital Negative Converter, which may already be on your system, right? And I'm going to demonstrate this also. But in Helicon Focus Pro, you go to Preferences and Integrations, and it gives you a link there to go download it. See where it says these instructions. It's going to show you where to download it. And then when you're in Helicon Focus, you open up the raw development settings. And this is, you make sure it says raw in and DNG out. So we're going to get to that. I'm going to show you that live. But I wanted to say another important distinction. Colors management is not color correction. They're two separate things. Color management is a scientific process of keeping your photos appearance consistent among different devices. And that would be your camera, your displays, and your prints, projectors included too. Color correction is what you choose to do based on your intention. It is personal. It is subjective. Color management is objective. So they're two separate things, but you need to do both of them. And it's necessary for all forms of photography. And that includes macro photography. At the end of the day, you should be able to enjoy color. And once you start this process, it's easy, it's hard, it's not hard, it can be fun, and you will enjoy your photography more because you're starting from a point of known, a point of yes, a point of, I know that this is a baseline. So I'm going to walk you through some things now. We're going to jump out of slideshow mode and we're going to go live into Adobe Lightroom and Helicon Pro. So we're going to walk through how and why to stack images in Helicon Focus Pro with the DNG method. We're going to talk about how to export and apply a camera profile of a color checker target, and how to use the white balance function with a color checker, and also how to apply a signature look to the edit. So let's get out of here and get into Lightroom. But before I do that, I'm going to pop into Zoom and see if there's any questions. So let's see, Q&A. Do we have anything that I should
Nothing yet, Matt, but I will go ahead and reiterate what Matt said. If you guys are having problems, color management problems particularly, regular problems we may not be able to help with, but color problems in specific, feel free to get them in. That's what Matt's here to do. He's more than happy to demo, and he's going to show us, and he is going to do a great job. But if you've got something in specific that maybe you need addressing, shoot it over to us. We're more than happy to get it over to him, and he'll do his thing.
Cheers. Thanks, Scott. All right. We're jumping in. All right, here we are in Adobe Lightroom Classic, and we're looking at my library. I put together some things. I just want to show you when you take a proper photograph of the Color Checker Classic Nano with a macro lens, this is what it could look like. Notice that it's in focus, that there's no huge shadows coming across any of these color patches. Very important things. If your light is angled in such a way that it's casting shadows, it's going to make it tough to do this. So normally with most color checkers, you can do this. You can hit the export button and then you go to this, which happens after your software gets installed, export presets, color checker camera calibration. And then you make a profile here. And you could say like Nikon Z6 II macro lens 90mm. And I put in enough information that I understand which profile this is. I'm going to say Nanlite softbox because I used a Nanlite and a softbox because the kind of light you make, the kind of light you use can affect it. So I like to know which light it was. And then I'm going to click export and you'll see it says processing full profile in the upper left-hand corner. And it's going to take a while to do that. And I already know what's going to happen here. It's going to struggle to make a profile of this. And because it's a little bit different than the larger color checker targets, it's going to say this: the profile could not be created. That's okay. That's normal. If it works for you, that's okay. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to right click on it and say show in Finder. And now here it is. And we're going to open up the standalone software, which is called Color Checker Camera Calibration. And here it is right here. So I'm just going to drag this image over there, which is a DNG. And if you didn't have a DNG image, then you could simply go into Lightroom and say, in the help menu, convert photo to DNG, which is also under library, convert photo to DNG. If you have like an NEF or an ARS, it's AR5, any sort of file, then you might not be able to do that. You need to convert it to DNG. So now we have this image right here, and now it said it couldn't be detected with this image, but that's okay, because all it says, all you need to do is put little dots at the corners. So we put some dots at the corners like this. And now you drag them so that these green boxes end up in the middle, just like so. And once the green boxes are all in the middle, you click create profile, and then you give it a name. So this is Nikon Z6 II, Nanlite softbox macro 90mm. Okay, good. And now I'm going to hit save, and it's saving this profile. And just so you know, anytime you create a new profile like this, at the end of this, it's going to prompt for you to quit the software that accesses the profile and start it up again. So what that means is it's going to tell me applications using it need to be restarted. Great. I can quit this software now. I go back into Lightroom and I say quit Lightroom. And I'm going to open up Lightroom again after this is done. And that will make this profile available for me to use. So now I'm starting Lightroom. And I'm going to go into the develop module. And now over here where it says profile, and normally you're used to seeing Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Adobe Neutral, Adobe Portrait, Standard V2, and Vivid. What you're going to do instead is go down and click Browse. And down here under Profiles, you'll see that there's a bunch of other profiles here, right? And now the one that I said right here is Nikon Z6 II Nanlite Softbox Macro 90. If I click on the star, it gets added to my favorites list. And now I click on this here. So I'm going to show you what happens if we start with Adobe Color. Watch the blues and then the purples and this pink over here. When I switch it from Adobe Color, to this, watch the colors shift. I'll switch it back and then switch it back and switch it back. There's a huge amount of saturation change and color change. And what happened here was all of these are known values. These are calibrated color patches. And the software compares what it sees in the DNG file to what it should be, and it shifts things to the appropriate place. So now you've started from a place of neutral. All of the colors are what they should be at the right saturation. And the next thing you need to do is white balance. So I'm going to grab the color picker here. And I'm going to go to the second square in here. I'm going to click on that. And now it's been neutralized. And if we hit reset, that's where it started. And we go back to where we were, that's where it is. Can you see the difference? I'm going to do it one more time. This is where it started, which, like we're wearing the colored sunglasses, right? This looks okay until you see this. And this is correct. This is scientifically correct. It's been measured, calibrated, and set to the right place. Step one, we are color managed. So what do we do with this? So I'm going to copy. I'm going to click check none. And I'm going to say treatment and profile. I'm going to go white balance also. Now notice that this also says process version, right? These are the only things you really need to copy. And then you can go into another picture that you shot with this, let's say like this one, and I can say, I can go paste, and I'm pasting just those things. And you'll see that it changed this and it changed the white balance. So the difference between this and this is huge. And let me zoom in on it to show you. There's this and there's that, right? Big difference between those two. And all I did was add a camera profile and a white balance. And now I'm starting from a place of honesty, of truth. And let's see, we'll do this one also. So this one is reset, right? And I paste that in, and now we'll just switch between them. You'll see from here to that. And this is the actual color of the light. Now, why would you care about that? Well, let me show you. I'm going to show you the BTS of this. Behind this light, and do I have a wider shot? I don't. Behind this light is a softbox, but in front of this light is a flashlight, and that flashlight is 4200 Kelvin. I chose to put a warmer, now read not neutral light, on the front of the flower. And I'm going to do it again. So this was my buildup. This is the background lit with just the softbox. And now this is the proper exposure with the flashlight on the front, which is a deliberately warmer light source. And I didn't have to adjust the image because my camera was set for daylight and my light was warmer on purpose. So the light coming through the back was one color temperature and the light coming from the front was another. But I know that it's correct because of that. So that's it. That's all you need to do is you make a profile from this and you grab your white balance, and then you go into your image and you apply those two things. And now you can do whatever you want, including stacking. So let's take a look at a stack for a second. This image, I shot 56 of them. And I'm just going to quickly go through them, right? And I have all these different focus stacks that I did by moving the focusing rail just a little bit until the very front of this was out of focus, right? So there we go. We're moving in, moving in, moving in. And it's getting closer and closer. So I took all of these images, all 56 of these images that it took to go through the entire focus range, and I loaded them up into Helicon Focus. How did I do that? Well, let me show you. I want to use the DNG method. So I did this again, show in Finder. If you're on Windows, it'd be show in Windows Explorer, right? And 236 is the first one. So I just scroll down to the bottom here and find the last one, and it's 2291. So I start at 236 and I go to 2291 and I hold down shift, and then I dragged all of those over here to Helicon Focus. I just dropped them in here, and then you can see them all loaded up over on the side here. So before I do anything else, I want to go up to the preferences, which I told you we'd talk about again, and then go over to integration and make sure that the Adobe DNG converter is installed and that the plugin path is recognized and all that. Mine worked out just fine. But if you needed to, you could click on these instructions link right here, and it'll take you to a page that says Adobe DNG converter and where to download it. And it gives you all the instructions that you need there. So that's step one. Step two is to make sure you go into the raw development settings down here underneath all of these files and make sure this says raw in and DNG out. You could, these are all DNG images already. If you had, let's say, native Nikon or Canon or Sony images, use raw and DNG out. DNG loader I can use right now because I have all DNG, but this is the same thing anyway. And then you choose your color space, which in my suggestion would be Adobe RGB or ProPhoto, not sRGB, because you want to keep as much color during the beginning of the process as possible. And when you export, use a smaller color space, which is sRGB. Adobe RGB and ProPhoto RGB are much bigger than sRGB. Cancel out of that. You hit OK if you change something, right? So now we have all these images, right? If you've never experienced Helicon Focus Pro before, you'll see that there's 3 different rendering methods, which is why this is so popular. If you don't know what they are, you can click on the question mark here and it'll show you in their help files what all of the different things are. But we're not going to do that right now. What I usually do is I render all 3 of them. So I click method A and then click render, and you'll see that it shows up down here. I clicked it twice. That's why that happened. And then I click method B, and it doesn't hurt anything to do that. And I click render. And we're only going to go through this once, folks. You'll get to see other Lightroom based stuff after this. I'm going to show you the differences. And I click method C and I click render. And now you'll see the blue progress bar down on the bottom left-hand corner shows you how far it is in processing these. Depending on the speed of your computer, how much else you have open, etc., your results may vary. So be patient with your computer while it does the heavy lifting here. Once it has done with one of them, you'll see the blue bar disappear. And now on the right-hand pane, you see the results. The left-hand pane, you see one of the images, right? And that's the one you've selected. So if you click over here on a different image, it's going to load a different image. Then over here, you can click and hold, and it's going to give you 100% zoom as you scroll around and show you the results. Now, the beautiful thing, and I have to point this out, these all say digital negative, DNG. We're working with raw files here, folks. And it's going to finish with a raw file. And that's super powerful because you can make all of the adjustments that you want afterwards, right? So these black streaks that you're seeing here are the dust that were on my sensor or the lens or something. So this happens a lot of the time in macro, and they're easy to eliminate if they're in good spots, and these happen to be in okay spots. When you're done, you just go to save all, file, save all, and it's going to tell you to quit Helicon Focus when you're done. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it. I'm going to show you the results though. First, I'm going to go up top here and collapse the result, those. And now I'm going to show you the differences between these. So we have the B and the C and the A. So this is the first rendering method. And let's compare that to the second one. We've got A and B. And now we're going to do the XY and show you the differences. What you want to look for is around the edges and see if weird things happen around the edges. And I don't see anything weird happening around the edges of this one. it seems like these are relatively similar. Um, so let's compare the C to the B. And I'm going to zoom in on these and tab out. So some rendering methods are better than others depending on contrast and detail. And it seems like in this case, I see a little bit more haloing in the C over here, where the contrast on the edges versus the B method. Um, I would say the B is superior to the C in this one. So I'm going to set aside the C and I'm just going to look at the B moving forward. This is the A. All right. So let's see if I have made any adjustments to this. So this one has some adjustments and this one has, they have the same adjustments going on. That's great. And I just went into the develop tab to show you this. So let's do a reset on this one. This is where it started. And this is a raw file. This is a DNG focus stack straight out of Helicon. And now I could say, all right, well, I'd like to take the same information that I had before, which is still in my clipboard, and I'm going to paste it in. So all I did was I pasted in what I had from that other image, which over here was I copied just the white balance and the treatment. And I came back over here to, let's find the B version. There we go. To this B version. And now before was this and after. So now that color is a little bit cool, right? And now it's a little bit warm, which was my intent. That's exactly what I wanted to do. So right there, this image is superior to out of camera or using, let's say, Adobe Landscape, which is inappropriate. I think in this case, neutral is way too gray. Portrait is a little bit too punchy, right? No, I'm going to go for the profile that I made, which makes the color of these petals exactly what I wanted it to be. And now I just have a little bit of cleanup to do on some other stuff. Let's say I needed to get rid of these. I could choose the appropriate tool, whether it's cloning it out or healing it out. That was a little inelegant. I might actually take this into Photoshop to do some of that, getting rid of and some of that. So anytime you see some of these things that are unlikely to be advantageous to your image, you can clone them out. And I'm not going to belabor that point because we've all done a fair amount of cloning, right? And now I want to say, how do I make this my own image, right? Well, there's some great new things going on in Photoshop where when you click on the local selection and masking, you can say subject, sky, background, and all this other stuff. Let's see what the subject mask does. And since this is a similar color in night photography, purple doesn't happen often. So I'm going to pick a color that it definitely isn't. I'm going to change a green color overlay. Oh, look at that. Well, it's got everything but the stem. That sounds good. I do want the stem in there too. So I'm going to click add and do brush and leave auto mask on. And I'm going to simply also brush in just the stem here. You see how that's turning green? So now I know that this whole thing, this whole mask is something that I want to affect. And if I crank the exposure slider up and down, you'll see that pretty much nailed it, right? So let's ignore that. And then let's start to talk about what to do that is color correction, since we've already taken care of our color management. So in terms of color correction, I want to work on contrast control first. And I don't mean using the whole contrast slider because it's affecting everything at the same time. So what I want to do first is I want to make sure that the relationship between the highlights and the whites and the shadows and the blacks are good. To me, this all looks a little bit dark in the shadow area. So I'm going to pull up the shadows first. And now I'm starting to see detail in those areas that were too shadowy. But I want to make sure that the blacks get pinned. And you see, watching the histogram up top here, I'm just going to pull these blacks down a little bit until a real black happens. And there we go. So now I think that as I increase the shadows a little bit, now I'm starting to see detail in the darker areas that makes me truly like the relationship between those two. But now we have the whites and the highlights need some attention also. So I'm going to try and bring the distance between them a little bit more, increase the contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights down and bring the whites up just a tiny little bit until it looks the proper amount of contrast to my eyes. So let's see the difference. So this was raw, straight out of camera. This is masked and selected. And now I've brought those two things up to where they are. And just by using the sliders for highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And that's really all that I needed to do for this particular photograph, in my opinion, to make it successful. If I were to use something like dehaze instead, you have to be very careful because dehaze increases saturation at the same time, and that will affect your color also. Now, I did raise some of these values quite a bit, so I'm going to bring the saturation down just a tiny bit, more into the believable range because it's a little juicy where it is, right? Just down a point or two to what I know and remember as being correct and true. So now I have that mask done. And I'd say I'm actually done with that image. I like where it is. I'm very happy. I'm going to close that local selection. I could go back into local selection and say select background, right? But I think I kind of nailed it when it came to the exposure. I could make it whiter. I can make it less bright, right? You can bring just the highlights down, but it is meant to be a white background. So perhaps we bring the exposure up on that to make it a true white. But watch your histogram. I don't want to clip. So I'm just gonna, oh, there we go. Now it's totally clipping. Let's bring it back down. And I turned on the clipping warning by clicking on this little triangle up top there. And I'll do the same for shadows too. And there's no shadows clipping. That's fantastic. So let's see before and after, before and after. Now we have a finished image. So that was the whole process where we first engaged in color management by creating a camera profile and applying it to it along with a white balance starting from neutral. And we're just recognizing that this had a warm colored light coming from the front. Uh, and that was warming up the front a little bit, but the back was a neutral light. So, yeah, so that is the beginning of that one. Let's take a look at some other examples here where this is a straight out of camera shot. You can tell because there's a little bit of filth on my sensor. I didn't clean that up. And it's, somebody made a pin and I took a picture of it, right? So here's Adobe Color. And then here is with the correct. And you'll see that it does change the contrast. And why should I care, you say? Well, the other part was good enough. Well, good enough is nice, right? But when you want things to be consistent, you want to start from an area of truth. And that's what this is. And that little bit to me made me satisfied. There's something satisfying about seeing things in the right place. And that applies to color too. Let's hit reset on this one. This is a color with very delicate. This is a single shot, right? I didn't make a stack of this one. Not every macro has to be a stacked shot, correct? And when I go from the canned Adobe Color and I go to this, you see how those delicate colors just pop right in there? See it? And to me, that is an indication that I'm in the right place, right? Now those have the colors that I remember. There was a little bit more magenta and red in there than the canned profile was. But let's talk about what these are. Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Neutral, Portrait, Standard, and Vivid. Those Adobe Color camera profiles are recipes, and they're recipes made to work in the majority of situations. Now, that doesn't mean they're wrong. It is subjective, right? But when we use a profile that camera profile that we make. This camera profile is specific to the lighting that you used, the camera that you have, and the lens that's on it. All of those can be affected. And changing any of those variables could change the camera profile. That's why you'll only see a list of custom camera profiles for the camera it belongs to. Let's say if you have a Canon and a Nikon, you'll only see the Nikon camera profiles that you've made show up for the Nikon, not the Canon ones, because they won't work. They're not for it. So let's look at another one. Instead of me using uh, standard white lights, I used a red, green, and blue lights to illuminate this. And wherever those three colors intersected, they create white light. But in all other places, they are their chroma instead of a fully rendered spectrum of light. So to me, this is a tough one. It's not necessarily as sharp as I'd want it to be, but it was more of a creative photograph and I had a lot of fun with it. So in this case, I just wanted it to look correct. And the difference between that and this was a big deal, right? So this is where it started, and this is where I ended up with my edit after I made a lot of color correction decisions. And all of that gave me things to think about. So here's another good one. The Adobe Color made this a little bit too warm in places. This is a close-up of a mason jar, if you can imagine that. You might remember from one of the macro challenges I did with Christian Domek from B&H. This photograph came out of it, and now I bring this up. Like, I shot this photograph without taking a photograph of a color checker target. Yet I can still apply a profile later because the same lights that I use for that are the same lights I used to later make a photograph that we saw of the color checker nano. So I'm going to use that same profile to apply to this. And now that is actually the colors that happened, because I did have a pale pink light over on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I had a different one. So a different one that was neutral. So just right there, I'm super happy about this being the correct color. And now I can proceed in making it what I want. So if I hit reset, you can see it started there, and I ended up here after making both a color management and a color correction decisions. All right. So I'm going to jump out for a second and see if there's more questions. Scott, is there anything I should be aware of?
We do have a question here from Martin on Vimeo. He wanted to know, what about monitor calibration? Did you calibrate it first to make sure it accurately displays all colors?
Absolutely 100% yes. Thank you, Martin. And hello. Yes, let's see if I can bring that up to show you guys. I calibrate, let's see if we got this. Apple puts it in a weird place now. So here's my 3 monitors that I have, and I click on display settings. Let's see if we can get these to show up. There we go. So this color profile right here is the one that I made on 10/28 on October 28th. And it's tied to the BenQ SW321C that you're seeing me present this on. And then my MacBook Pro also has its own, and let's see, that's the 271. That's my other. And then the MacBook Pro has one, but it shows it in a weird way that I'm just going to avoid now. But I absolutely have to, and always will make sure that the colors that I'm seeing here are accurate. And you do that using what I showed, the Calibrate display profiling solutions. And we'll talk about that again afterwards. Thanks for that question, Martin. All right, so here's another use case scenario. I was working with the 90 millimeter macro apo lens that Novaflex has, and I wanted to make sure I built a profile for that because I was sure that it was going to be different than the Laowa 100 millimeter macro lens that I have, or any other lens that I have, because there are variations in manufacturing and coatings and all these other things. So to make all of my macro images look the same, or at least start from the same place, what do? Of course, I photograph the color checker nano. So this was an image shot with that 90 millimeter apo, and I used the same method that we saw before of opening up, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing for you again, but opening up the standalone color checker camera calibration, dropping the DNG image in there, and then we'll go over here and look at it. I already have that applied, but I'm going to turn it off and show you. Watch all those blues right through this triangle right here. If I do that and I apply this again, now we have this Nikon Z6 macro, and I'm using a Photix Noir D4 light and the 80 millimeter, 90 millimeter Apo lens. So your naming scheme is going to be very important for you understanding your camera calibrations. I do it by the lens and the light, because the camera is pretty much always the whatever it's attached to. It is whatever it's attached to. So I have that, right? And then I can go grab my white balance here, which if I just set this back to as shot, there's the white balance is pretty much the same, but let's do it scientifically. I white balance off of that panel, and then I hit copy, and I grab check none, treatment and profile, white balance. And then I go over to the first shot here, and I hit reset, and I paste this in. Now you can see the difference between this and that. On your screen, you can see it's a contrast difference, right? So now I'm going to enjoy the benefits of starting from a place that I know of is a good place. And I know that I worked on one of these images. It was that one. So let's do this again. So what would I do with this one? I'd say there's a clear subject here, which there is. So once I've done my color management parts, I make a mask just for the subject. And on this one, I brought the highlights down and the whites down also, because it was a little bit too bright, too much contrast. And and then I also brought the blacks down and the shadows up on this one. And you'll see that that was contrast control. It was not color control. All I did was make sure that the relationships between highlights and shadows ended up being appropriate with each other. That's the only thing that I worked on there. And then over here, the background was a little bit gray. It was a little bit underexposed on purpose because I didn't want the clip. So I just made a mask for the background and raised it up. So that was off of a stack of 28 images. And that was a pretty tall flower. This was a lily from when I was out kayaking. I found it floating. And then here's another version, which I haven't touched. So let's see, we've got the C and B and A version from Helicon. And let's just go into these and reset and see which one is the best and why. So look at this area in here as I flip through them. Thanks for moving. There we go. That one is not as rendered. This one has a little bit more information, right? And then the third one is not as rendered. So I'd actually say that the B version of the Helicon Focus stacking method was superior, unless of course you like that little bit more out of focus area. But I think that that one's superior. So I'm going to stick with this one. And it's funny, there's even stuff going on the top of this flower that you can only see when the macro stack is done. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose the correct camera profile, and then things just start to pop into the right place. We've got these gentle greens, right? And now you could say, well, you know what? I think it should be a little bit warmer. So I'm just going to bring it a little bit more towards warm because I chose to, right? That makes me happy. It doesn't always have to be about the science. And then I'm going to go select subject. And now we have a couple of things missing from that. So I'm going to click add and choose brush, make sure auto mask is on because there's a nice clean edge here. And I'm going to brush in the rest of this over here. And I'm going to brush in the rest of this over here. So I'm only working on the subject here. And we'll do something a little bit fun. I'm going to do something attractive and juicy. I'm going to grab the dehaze slider and then I'm going to bring the contrast down, even though dehaze brings it up. And I'm going to bring the shadows up. And now we're starting to get some luminance in there, right? But I'm going to bring the blacks back down a little bit so we get some real blacks in there. And now that's nice and juicy, right? And what if I say I want to select the background? Well, that didn't quite work. So I'm going to undo that. And instead, I'm going to click on this triple dot and say duplicate and invert mask. So now I have the opposite of that mask. And it looks like I need to brush out a little bit over there. I'm going to subtract and brush. And I'm going to brush out that little bit there because I want to do something fun with this. I'm going to change the hue. I'm going to change the background to a color. Look at that, just by changing the hue slider here. Let's say we want it to be blue. So we'll just do blue and we'll ramp up that saturation a little bit. So now we've done something fun with this one. And it started from this neutral image, which is a DNG, a focus stack, and it ended up with that. And in the end, as soon as I did this, I'm like, wow, that's a little bit too juicy. So I'm going to go back in to my mask here and say the saturation is a little bit too much and bring it back down because that's what I do. And for those of you who are cringing because there's so many dust spots, it happens in macro, guys. It happens. I'm just going to clean up some of these dust spots. And you might want to use one of the new tools, like the content aware. So, all right. So that is that demonstration about how I used, because I had a different lens, I shot the color checker again. Now, here's a great example. This is that shot. I'll show you the setup on this one, actually. I had a big old softbox behind these pretty big flowers. I had to back off because I wanted to get the entire vase in there. I had a Fresnel lens on a spotlight up from above to cast a nice crisp shadow on the flowers while also asking for translucence coming through the backlighting. And I was using that's how I filled the frame with the image from. So I was using this Apo 90mm lens also. And there you'll see it mounted on the Novaflex auto bellows on my Nikon Z6 or Z6 II. I forgot which it was. And even shooting at f16 or 16 and a half, 11 and a half, I still had to focus stack this image. So there's the whole setup. And here's the backlighting, and there's that nice crispy Fresnel light coming down from the top. So what I did was I made sure that the backlight was not blown out, but it was sufficient enough to create some wrap and some translucence. And then the top light, the main light, created some depth for the images. And then I combined the two together in one shot in a single image. I said, all right, that looks good. And it did. It made me very happy. So I liked that image and I thought it was nice, but rather more attracted to the 48 images where I shot where it was closer up. I thought that this one bud was really delicate and beautiful. So I focus stacked those as I showed you in Helicon. And then we have these three different versions of it. And I chose, I'm not going to go through all of them again. I chose the A version. I'm going to show you the decisions that I made. I made another profile. This one I called Z6 CC Mini. I didn't talk about what the lights were, but let's see what I did. I made a mask simply after neutralizing all of this, I said, wow, would you look at that? That is exactly how I remembered the flowers being, this delicate pale pink that wasn't overly saturated, and this little bloom of yellow in the center that I really loved. And I wanted to accentuate that. So in this case, I brought the contrast down and the highlights all the way down, controlling contrast. Uh, and then I brought the whites up. So the difference between the whites and the highlights got accentuated, but without destroying any of this detail in the flowers. And I did bring the dehaze up, and I probably end up bringing the saturation down a couple of points here, you know. But the difference between correct, which is this is color managed, it's beautiful, this is accurate, and an emotional response is this. So now I took it from correct to even better, to right for me. It feels good for me. And that's the difference between color management and color correction. But making color corrections without being color managed is like starting with those colored sunglasses. You don't know where you're starting from, and things get crazy pretty quickly. All right, let's look at some other opportunities where things might get a little bit crazy, right? So we have a focus stacked image of a cherry here. Cherries have a certain color, right? Look at this. We've got Adobe Color. We've got Adobe Landscape. Wait, it got warmer. Why would landscape be warmer? Well, because that looks good for landscapes, but this ain't a landscape. So which of these would be correct? Neutral looks a little plain. Portrait does look juicy. And hey, look at this. Like the surface of a cherry actually has a lot of texture to it. It's beautiful. But it should actually be that. But I've made all these changes already. So I'm going to hit reset. I'm going to then say CC Mini, right? And now I've got correct color on this cherry. And I want to pay close attention to making sure that the observer can see the difference between what is the background and these beautiful highlights coming around the shape of the side of the cherry. So again, I'm going to use these wonderful new things that Adobe's provided us with, selecting the subject mask. I'm going to ignore the fact that it's missing a little bit of that for the sake of time here. And I'm going to say, what could I do with this? I'm just going to go to extremes and say, all right, well, to me, I think that there could be a little bit more in the shadow area. No, I don't think that's it, really. Maybe if we hit it with the classic and a little bit of dehaze, that's nice, right? But what I'm really looking for is more detail. So I'm just going to pull the clarity slider. And once I do that, I'm starting to see more of the details here because it's adding a little sharpness and a little saturation. But I'm going to bring the contrast back down a little bit. And I'm going to call that kind of good right there. And I'm actually going to say subtract and brush and auto mask. I'm going to get rid of the stem from this. I don't think that these adjustments are appropriate for the stem. So I'm just getting rid of the stem. And we're going to say show overlay and make sure that we get rid of this. Take off auto mask because it's not really doing the right thing yet. There we go. And it doesn't matter because there's no mask out here. Good. So now we cleared that. And now I think that this is okay and a little bit more cherry, right? So, yep, we've got that. Now, what if you're outdoors? This is a good question. And I want to show you this is a good series. This is tough. I was out in Joshua Tree and it was super windy. And these cholla, you can see as I go through the focus stack here, these cholla were still jiggling a little bit in the breeze, right? And this is a flower that hadn't opened up yet, and I wanted to capture it. And it was good, but the color was really delicate. So collapse the stack again. There we go. When I did the focus stack, I ended up with this beauty. And I'm going to hit reset on that. Now, this is what it actually could look like. If I go back to my history here,
So this is a direct shade. I have some outdoor things that I've shot with a color checker under similar. I did not shoot a checker on that day, but I've shot a color checker in Joshua Tree during daylight during the same time of year. So what I did was I switched from this, which is a little bit cool, to that one, which has, I think, appropriate amount of color. And I'm just gonna, you see how that's a little bit blue, and this is a little bit warmer. This is more of a moment of truth to me. And then I made another mask for it, which is add subject, and I brought the whites down, and I brought the highlights down, shadows, contrast, and brought the black speck down to pin it. And I really truly like where this one ended up, especially because of all this detail that you can see down here at the base of where the cactus flower is. Now, of course, you can ignore the parts right here, which I can show you. Of course, you need to get rid of the artifacts that are part of making macro. So there's some things that happen in individual frames, which you can get rid of also during the stacking process, but I chose not to. I like to do them here where the tools are different, right? Then there's this delicate flower. When I shot this, it, I believe I've shot it a little bit overexposed. And you could tell looking at the histogram here, I didn't clip anything, right? But it looks a little bit overexposed. But this color was so hard to nail. And I'm just going to show you how fun it was. I was working near a very sharp cactus that's famous for um, leaving its mark on people that touch it. So instead, all right, here we go. So let's take a look. This one is a TIFF. The reason that I'm presenting to you guys to use a DNG workflow instead of a TIFF workflow is if you apply all of your edit decisions uh, prior to stacking, you're locked in. You've locked in a lot of color flexibility. You've locked in a lot of adjustment flexibility, and you're gonna have to process all those images and spit them out as TIFFs and then stack them. It's fortunate that Helicon has the ability to do a DNG workflow and return to you a single DNG, which is a lot lighter to carry. So um, in this case, I think that it's important to run the DNG. So this is a TIFF, and when I did it, and this is the first time I ran it, I didn't. I was like, that's not the color. That's not the color that it was. As much as I tried to match the color temperature, it's just daylight, right? And then I went in here and I said, this is more the color, you know. And let me go back to where I started on this one. This is the DNG as it came out of uh, Helicon Focus. But then after I took a color checker and I neutralized it and I applied that to this, now I've got this absolute perfect feeling of what that day was like. This is the color of the sunlight down here on the cactus, right? The sunlight was a little glowy, a little dusty, and it felt right. And this is definitely the color of that cholla flower. And it makes me feel, and this is the point that I really wanted to get to, is that all of the care that I put into taking care of focus stacking, I also had to put the same care into making sure I was color managed, and then I could start to apply things that I wanted to do. So I then added, this is the too bright straight out of camera DNG. I added a mask for just the flower, and I made an exposure adjustment down, and I added some dehaze to it. And then I inverted that mask, and then I also brought down the background almost the stop 0.8, and I brought the highlights down on that. And now this has the feeling, this is the color correction. And we see where we started, where the color feels wrong. It's a little off-putting. And then in the end, we know what the most important part of the photograph is, and we feel like the color is correct. So I only got to that point because I knew what it should be. Now I have one last example that I want to show you. This is kind of an advanced one. Um, I think I presented this before, but I want to talk about it in terms of color. I shot a pano with macro, and let's see where we get these. So here's the left panel where I shot a whole focus stack of this one all the way through, and decided on one of these two focusing process or stacking processes. This is the C version out of Helicon Focus, and this is the B version. The B version is much cleaner. You can see these highlights in here get a little glowy versus not glowy there. So it was superior. So I processed all of them with the B version. So you can see this is the 3 panels that I focus stacked in Helicon Focus. And then I combined them using PT GUI. But I'm going to show you how to do it in Lightroom, which is just like you would do for any panorama. Just select those 3, choose photo merge and panorama. And spherical, this is funny, spherical and cylindrical, which often work for all photos, but perspective doesn't. Perspective does work for this, and you get a DNG back. So you can click merge, and then you get that image coming in here. But I have the TIFF version that I made here, right? So this TIFF, I cannot change any of that color because I made it through a process that rasterized the image. But since I have this here, which is a DNG still, I should be able to apply those things, which I cannot. So, oh, because those were TIFFs. There we go. If these were DNGs, then it would be a different matter. But I finally ended up on this after combining those, and I was very happy with the process because I used the color checker on this one specifically to make sure that I got these beautiful hues reflecting in here because I had 2 different color temperature images. Now I have drolled on for a long time about these things that I love. I just want to say there's some time for Q&A now. Let's talk about that. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to say thank you again to B&H for hosting. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. I love speaking at the B&H event space, and I love sharing the information that I have with all of you people. And also thank you so much to Calibrate and Novaflex for their support. It's very fun being an ambassador for those 2 fine brands. If you'd like to see anything that I do, please visit National Parks at Night. You can check out our Night Photo Summit, which is online and virtual in February, or in person, Canab at the Nightscaper Conference in May. Cool.
Awesome. Matt, amazing job. We love it. We love you. We love having you here. Definitely a special thanks to our hosts, Novaflex and Calibrate, for setting this up. Not a whole ton of questions. I think you did an amazing job of being clear and concise, but I did want to go back to something you had spoken about earlier on, and you re-mentioned it towards the end of the demo, and just kind of get you to break it down a little bit. You talked a little bit about, and you gave a wonderful demonstration showing how viewing an uncalibrated monitor is akin to wearing a pair of glasses that were of a different shade. I like the old analogy of, watching standard definition versus high definition. There's a million ways to skin a cat, as they say, right? So my question is, at what point do you adapt and realize and start seeing differently? Is it instantaneous once you take those shaded glasses off and put on the new, prescription sunglasses or regular glasses, that it becomes instantaneous? Or is there an adjustment period before you finally realize, okay, this is how it's supposed to be seen? Because I would assume your mind makes that assumption of, okay, this is all I know. This is everything I've seen. And so now you're looking at it in a different light. So your instinct is to start editing towards what you're used to seeing. And then when you print, obviously that is going to be an issue. How long does it take for that sort of brain clicky in?
I want to say that for me, it's instant, and I hope it is for everybody else. And the moment of truth is when you apply the camera profile to a color checker, and you see those colors pop into place. And especially if you hold it up right next to the screen and you see that they look the same, that's the moment of truth. And when you're doing profile display profiling, um, at the end of the process there's a toggle that you can, I've demonstrated this before, there's a toggle where you can see before and after. That's the other moment of truth. So when you're doing your displays, at the end of that process, toggle the before and after, and you'd be like, oh, because our eyes get used to things so quickly, and so let's call it silently. There's no triggers in our body that anything's wrong, because the eyes are the most adaptive tools that we have. But what we can get used to is not necessarily what we should get used to, and that's why I'm wearing the glasses, to demonstrate that point. It's starting to look normal. Wearing these glasses is starting to look normal. The white in the back of the B&H logo is starting to look neutral, even after a minute or two of wearing these. And that's how adaptive these beautiful organs are that we have. But it's not the truth.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Matt, I want to thank you again for being here, for spending some time with us. I know it won't be the last time we see you. We'll see you back hopefully soon. Hopefully you don't make us wait too long.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, thank you to everybody at home as well for joining us. Hopefully this was super informative for you as it was for me. It took a lot away from it, but that is all the time we have for today. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Catch you next time.
Take care.